Hello, and welcome to What is Innovation? The podcast that explores the reality of a word that is in danger of losing its meaning altogether. This podcast is produced by Outlast Consulting, LLC, a boutique consultancy that helps companies use innovation principles to solve their toughest business problems. I'm your host, Jared Simmons, and I'm so excited to have Doug Howarth. Doug Howarth's life is a story of remarkable challenges and groundbreaking discoveries. From his fascination with coordinate systems to a life-saving kidney transplant, his journey led him to uncover the concept of hypernomics, a field that explores uncharted dimensions in market analysis. Driven by newfound clarity, Doug founded Hypernomics Inc. and collaborated with industry giants like NASA and Lockheed Martin, developing innovative software capable of analyzing markets in 4 or more dimensions. His upcoming book, Hypernomics, Using Hidden Dimensions to Solve Unseen Problems, will revolutionize conventional thinking. Doug's story inspires us to embrace unconventional thinking and unleash extraordinary breakthroughs. Doug, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. I'm so excited for this conversation. I know I'm going to learn a lot.
Well, Jared, I'm excited too. I looked at your background and it's pretty amazing things that you've been through. So thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. We'll dive right in. So, Doug, what in your mind is innovation?
Innovation, I think, is the process of making society's next step, figuring out what the world wants, doesn't have, and a lot of times what they can afford. And so we've dedicated our entire company to that credo. So try to find out what somebody wants, doesn't have, and can afford. So that's what we kind of do.
In my mind, it pops a Venn diagram in my head immediately. Those 3 circles.
Spoken like a true engineer.
Yeah, I can't help it. My programming is what it is. But that is such an important intersection,
right? Because
if you step outside of any one of those 3 things, you run the risk of being suboptimal.
Yes, exactly.
So, society's next step. That implies we are in a certain place and you have a vision about where we might head next. What is society's next step in your mind?
Well, society actually, what's interesting, what we've discovered is that society economically has ways that it moves that we can characterize. So all markets, they form these limits. We call these frontiers, or we call them demand frontiers. And it works out that the stock market has a demand frontier. If you were to plot the prices, or I should say the quantity of stocks on the horizontal axis, all the shares available for sale, and the prices on the vertical axis of the S&P 500, if you plotted all of them out, what you'd see is this huge elliptical diagram of all the 500 points. And on the top of that diagram, there's this upper frontier, and the outer edge of this thing, there's an outer frontier. And it turns out that and there's also an inner frontier and a lower frontier. And it turns out that these limits are something that's been to date basically untracked. And that's kind of what we do, is we track these moving frontiers over time.
Right.
If you try to violate them, you can run into a case in which you're supposing the market will buy more than it's got money to. So when we say what the market wants, doesn't have, and can afford, in aerospace, for example, Airbus, they built this. My background is I had 31 years at the Skunk Works, and then I came up with this series of ideas and formed this company called Hypernomics Inc.
Wow.
I formed the company because I kept seeing products that would get into the market. And back to what your innovation question is, I took myself back and I said, well, what is it that the market wants? And people ask that kind of broadly. They said, well, we want the very best. Somebody might say, well, if you get the very, very best, sometimes the market can't afford it.
Right.
So what it turns out is that the biggest possible airliner that anybody could ever build was the A380 that the Airbus built. They started it back in 2000, and they supposed that they were going to sell 1,250 of these guys over the course of 20 years. And they just stopped production a little while ago, and they stopped at about a fifth of what they wanted.
Wow.
And the reason for that was they hadn't studied what the limits were of the market for the 20 years previous. Turned out that Boeing had only sold 2/3 of their number for the 747, and the A380 was quite a bit bigger.
Right.
And so the market couldn't stand it. But then they kind of redeemed themselves, did Airbus. There was a gap in the market. A lot of planes, if you've flown in planes, you've seen that they have the standard 3x3 kind of aisles, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And you've flown in smaller planes that might be 2x2.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not too many planes are designed to be 3x2. And so Airbus came up with the A220.
Oh, right.
And it kind of fit into this slot. And they've got 700 orders right now for this plane.
Wow.
Because that's a gap in the market that hadn't been filled yet.
It sort of optimizes around capacity, which translates to revenue, but also the ability to fly in and out of different kinds of airports and runways and things like that.
Precisely. Yes, exactly. There was a gap in the market. Capacity happens to be one of the broad terms for what we call value. Value is basically whatever the market decides it is. So in a plane, it's the capacity of the plane, the speed of the plane, the range of the plane, and the safety of the plane. So for example, the Russians have a plane that looks a lot like the Airbus A320 and the Boeing 737. It's a Tupolev, and I forget the exact number of it, but Boeing's built 10,000 plus, well, actually, I think about 20,000 plus 737s. Wow. Airbus has built a like number of A320s, but Tupolev has only sold about 100 of the Tupolev planes. The plane goes faster, has a bigger capacity, and it's a very safe plane, but the Boeing planes and the Airbus planes are 10 times safer.
Ah.
And so the safety turns out to be an important reason that people migrate to Boeing and Airbuses because they're very safe.
Interesting. So the perceived benefit, incremental benefit of the speed and the capacity is more than offset by the perceived risk around safety in the minds of the consumer.
Exactly. Yep. Mm-hmm. And it turns out you can measure all these things. And that's kind of what we specialize in. Basically, when you were doing some of your work at McKinsey and Koch and Procter & Gamble, you were measuring these kind of things. We're measuring these things across an entire market, the big sector of the economy.
Interesting. One of the neat things about working in consulting, and I'm sure one of the amazing things about what you do, because you do it on even a broader scale, is working in different domains and different industries and seeing different things. If you're looking for them, you get to see some themes develop, some things that kind of are not domain specific that translate across.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. What are some of the things that you've seen sort of manifest themselves over and over again in whatever domain you're looking at?
That's an excellent question. Basically, one of the first things we discovered is that as markets start to mature, so for example, in 2009, there was the very first mass-produced electric car. It was the Mitsubishi i-MiEV. And so when the market formed, if you had price on one axis and quantity going here, so when it formed, there was a first sale of a car in 2009. And then as the year went along, they made more and more sales. And by the time the year finished, there was a certain quantity and price for this 1 mile. So you can't make heads or tails of a market with 1 point.
Right.
Then in a couple of years, some more points hit the market and some more and some more. And what happens, to answer your question, is that as soon as the market hits about 2 or 3 dozen entrants, the market starts to self-organize. It self-organizes with respect to the limit that it's going to have, and it self-organizes with respect to what it's going to value. So in the case of an electric car, it's going to be horsepower and, say, passenger capacity. And so the market actually figures out what it is that they want to do. And when I say the market, these are buyers.
Right.
They're talking to one another and they say, what do you like about the Tesla? Wow, I like the horsepower and I like the range. What do you like about the Nissan Leaf? Well, it's inexpensive. And so people buy more of the less expensive cars and they buy fewer of the more expensive cars, but that's balanced against what the things are worth. And so it turns out that these forces are interacting across a common boundary. And that's we call the price axis.
That's how that sort of envelope, that elliptical shape starts to take shape that you were describing before.
Exactly. That's what happens in every demand function. And there's an elliptical shape that starts to form that comes out there.
As you see these things, are you seeing them in the data first, or are you hearing them in sort of qualitative ways or using your own experience? Or I know that was always a big thing for us, in consumer research, is being able to read the data without bringing your own bias to it, but then also using your life experience and things you know about people to put context to it. Is that a difficult balance, or is that something you think about?
Oh, no. In fact, the way I got to this, the story goes, It's a little family story here. Our washing machine went out. So the wife and I went out on an excursion to buy a bunch of washing machines. And I'm at about the fifth or sixth big box store that we're going for a washing machine. And she's been talking the whole time about what she likes and she doesn't like. And I'm trying to focus on what she says. And then I'm kind of getting a little tired of being out there looking for washing machines. But then she walks up in this big box store and she starts to talk about this washing machine. And she says, the machine we have at home, the drum is pretty small. I want something that can handle more clothes. And back to your question before, I said, that's a capacity thing.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
I go, drum size, the capacity versus price. So she's doing a 2D trade right there. She's willing to pay more for more capacity. And then she says, I like more cycles than we have at home. We only have one delicate cycle. I like to have 2 or 3 delicate cycles. I've said, cycles versus price. She's managing those two too. And so she's got a 3D thing going on.
Yeah.
So I see the one that she likes, and then I see the next one up the line. I said, what about this one? She goes, that's too expensive. We can't afford it. And then I realized that she was doing part of the demand function there. I look around the whole store and I think about the whole world and I think, well, we're one of the people that's buying this washing machine, so we're buying this one. Fewer are buying the one that I wanted, and then more are buying this one, and then still more are buying the one below it. I said, she's doing a 4-dimensional problem in her head. And I said,
that's brilliant. Yeah.
Well, what if everybody's doing that? And the punchline is that everybody's doing that all the time in a mathematically predictable way. That's the punchline to this.
Well, this is a very small group of people that could see that in that interaction. A lot of people would be just standing on the side waiting and saying, could you just pick a washing machine?
Yeah, well, it was a kind of a light bulb moment, I guess, is what you'd call it.
Yeah.
What I've also done is that it backs out my own personal opinion from everything. I think to myself, going back to washing machines, now my wife is part of the sea of people that are buying washing machines and everything else, but my purchase of a washing machine doesn't mean anything. It's the collective purchase of the washing machines that means everything. Mm-hmm. And so what we want to do in our company is we put our personal opinions as the last thing we inject into a problem. We want to see how the market is reacting to something. Mm-hmm. And so an interesting point on that and why you can get excellent questions from your customers is we were working on a general aviation plane for a customer. We were analyzing it. And, we worked out the capacity, it has a certain number of passengers and its speed and its range and all that kind of stuff. And they said, we think our plane is prettier than the average plane. We think it's very pretty. And could you measure that? And we said, I don't know. It sounds like a great question. Let's go try. And so we gave out 3-view drawings
nice.
Of all the planes in the industry.
Yeah.
And we passed them out to people and said, rank this 0 to 10, the form that you like the best. And it turned out that there was a response for that after you got the range and the speed and the volume of the thing, that the appearance of that made a difference. And it turned out that their plane wasn't the absolute most beautiful one in the lot, but it was right up next to the top. And it turned out that their value went up because of that. So that's an interesting thing.
It is.
The trick in this industry is to try to remove your biases as you go into the problem. Don't think that you know the answer. You try to guess at the answer. If you can't guess at it, you're going to have a hard time characterizing, but you might take a guess and you're going to say, well, I usually find 3 to 5 things that affect the, as you call it in engineering and estimation, there's going to be 3 to 5 to 20 things that might affect the outcome. Mm-hmm. And so instead of just taking 3 and supposing that's enough, we might get 20, 30, 40, or 50 things. And then we say, well, what does the market believe is important? And you'll almost always get some sort of surprise there. It said, oh, we guessed this and this correctly, but we had left out this, kind of like the appearance thing. We had left that out before. And now we know better than to do that.
Right. It's such a fine line, I find, between bringing a hypothesis or a guess to a situation and bringing a fully formed opinion.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And I feel like sometimes the role of the expert, when you come in and you've been deemed the expert in the room, I think people feel like they have to bring certainty.
Right.
And I think that certainty to me is kind of the death of learning. And once you declare something to be that, then you're not going to learn anything new about it.
Right.
And what you're describing is just the perfect sort of balance of based on my knowledge and expertise and experience, I think it's going to be in this general ballpark. But we still have to take out the flashlight and go looking to learn and explore.
Exactly. Precisely. Yes. That's precisely what we have to do. So, yes.
That's a great example. And it puts me in the mind of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship. That to me is also a place, especially when you talk about innovation, where there's a strong temptation to feel like you have to have all the answers in the startup world and know everything and bring a certain answer to the table versus here's what we know today. Here's what we think the answer is.
Right.
You've seen lots of different forms of value and valuations and the ways people value things.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen anything in the startup world or that environment where they look at value differently or kind of take on this challenge differently?
Yeah, I think that you've seen this in the space tourism industry. Space tourism industry is brand new, and it started in the early 2000s, late 1990s, I think. I think Dennis Tito was the first guy to go up on a Soyuz rocket, spend a couple of weeks at a space station, and come back down.
Huh.
And people got the very interesting idea that, well, hey, there ought to be a market for going to the space station. To me, Elon Musk says going beyond the space station, maybe going around, take a lap around the moon, or going all the way to Mars. And then as you back that up to Blue Origin and to Virgin Galactic, there ought to be a market for somebody going up to a high altitude and coming back down. And so the innovators in those markets basically saw gaps in the market between what Dennis Tito did and where they were, and they're filling these gaps.
I see.
That's an innovation that comes from observation. The same thing with Elon Musk. I remember working for a large aerospace company, I can't tell you who it is, a competitor to Tesla, and sitting in a room in the early 2000s and hypothesizing what the demand would be for the launcher market going forward. And the launchers of the day were pretty expensive. And then there's this company in the early 2000s nobody had heard of called Space Exploration, or SpaceX. And so everybody else is showing a few dozen launches over the course of a decade. And then I show SpaceX out there at 160 for 10 years, and they started laughing at me. And that was 11 years ago. I missed it by 4. I missed it by about 3%. And they missed it by an order of magnitude.
Order of magnitude, probably, yeah.
Right. What Musk brought to the table in the innovation was he decided to make things reusable. It had always been the holy grail in cost to make things reusable in space. But people kind of just played at it a little bit. They hadn't really followed through. Interestingly, McDonnell Douglas had actually worked out the first launcher that went up and came down and landed successfully. They did it a couple of times. Then one time it landed and one of the legs didn't deploy. The thing fell over and blew up.
Tipped over.
And basically, I think the Air Force was the sponsor. They gave up. But Elon Musk had a few failures, but he didn't give up. You've got to be persistent.
Oh, so important.
My God, there's nobody more persistent than Elon Musk. Say what you will about the guy. That guy persists. He persists. He's the modern day Edison. He doesn't know all of it. And there's some of the stuff I don't think will ever work. But the stuff that he's on and he understands, he persists.
Yes. It goes back to your model, your definition around what people want, don't have, and can't afford. He fixed that in that industry, in that domain.
Yeah, right. He did fix that. Because what happened there is there's a demand curve, and it's all these expensive launchers, and he basically extrapolated. He said, well, if I were to make things cheaper, I could sell 3, 4, 5 times what the other guys are doing. And so he did.
Yeah.
And good on him. He's revolutionized the industry, and everybody else is trying to play catch up to him right now.
That's for sure.
Right.
No two ways about that. So we've talked a lot about what innovation is. I'm curious if you have a thought about what isn't innovation.
Well, what is an innovation is to be sitting in a room and come up with an idea, and then somebody spouts off, we've never done it that way, or we've always done it this way. And the thing that is an innovation is supposing that you've got this tried and true model that will forever carry the day going forward. Unless you're Coca-Cola, which you worked at, there's a tried and true formula. Tried and true formulas work at Coke, but for most other industries, like the electric cars, these are fabulous cars we have right now, the electric ones, but they're going to be exceeded in the future. And if you think you can stay stationary while everybody else is moving forward, you've got another thing coming. What isn't innovation is to say, just to hang on to one idea and keep driving it forward. In the United States, up in the auto producing part of the world, Detroit, St. Louis, they had this idea that they would have planned obsolescence. They keep changing body styles and they make the cars wear out, and everybody would keep buying cars because people would keep buying cars.
Right.
So they had some great cars in the 60s, and then the 70s came and they started to open up their engineering tolerances and everything started to fall apart. Meanwhile, the Japanese said, what would happen if we tightened up the tolerances and made these cars last for 3, 4, 5 times what the other cars are lasting? And of course, then people started to flock to the cars that have more duration. That's another thing. You take the horsepower and maybe the capacity of a car, those are attributes that help determine the price.
Right.
But the longevity, perceived longevity of the car is going to be a big important factor. And so that people started moving towards longevity. And some people just didn't recognize that. The people that don't have the flexibility to change course, we've done this great. And we're the market leader. We've done this for forever. And I just saw a great movie on BlackBerry. I've forgotten the name of the thing because we haven't had it for a few years.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Blast from the past.
But BlackBerry was the first phone that lets you do emails for free. So it was a massive innovation. And they had the keypad, right?
Right.
And I remember when the iPhone came out and I go, I don't want to get rid of my keypad. I'll never get rid of a keypad.
Yeah.
But then about a year later, I got rid of my keypad.
I was in the same boat. I can't imagine typing on a flat screen.
Right.
How can you do that? Yeah.
Yeah. What are you going to get out of that?
Yeah.
So that's what innovation isn't. Suppose the innovation of the past will carry you forward to the future. So Research in Motion, the makers of BlackBerry, they had a great innovation. And it carried them through for over a decade. And then they thought, well, it'll keep carrying us through.
Right.
We'll make variations of the innovation. And when other people are making big leaps and you're taking a shuffle step, you're not going to make it to the next level.
That's a great insight. Innovation is not variations.
Yeah.
You have to actually move away from that idea toward the next new thing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If you don't, you're going to go kapoop.
Yeah. I think that car example from the 70s is a great one. I grew up in Southeast Alabama. My grandmother had 10 kids.
Wow.
Raised 10 children in very rural Alabama. And one of the things I learned from her was she always bought branded products. Always, all the time. I was like, oh, well, grandma, this one's a little cheaper, or this one, costs less or whatever. But there's a mindset of longevity and that quality. If I buy, she was already, into that fourth dimension of if I buy this and it costs 50 cents or $1 more, it's going to last twice as long. And in the long run, it's going to save me more.
Oh, yeah.
And so that was one of my first lessons as a small boy, economics and trade-offs and all those things.
Oh, sure. Right. Yeah.
I do think that really is something that when people start to play in the lower end of the market from like you were talking about, can't afford.
Right.
I think sometimes the definition of can't afford gets miscast as won't spend money on.
Yes. Right. Exactly.
There's a difference between the out-of-pocket expense and the total cost of ownership.
Right.
And I think people can make that distinction.
Yeah, if you take that the other way, I mean, you see a lot of firms, they come in and they may get a new CEO or a CFO. Maybe it's a public company or they've got lots of private shareholders, and then they say, well, I'm going to make the company more profitable. And all they'll understand is profit is revenue minus cost, and so I'm going to drop cost, therefore I'm going to increase profit. Well, that will work for a point, but you could take that to logical conclusion. People that tell me that just routinely, I say, well, why don't you set cost to zero? Don't do anything. Oh, that won't work, Doug. Well, that's kind of the point. Maybe you want to try to increase the value and compare it to cost and then worry about what your costs are afterwards. And people just lose sight of that. They will say, well, how would I figure that out? And the thing is that the market will tell you what it wants. You just have to dig.
Right.
It's very apparent what the market wants. Once you start to understand how you dig all this stuff up, you throw it up into a model, and the model tries to reduce the errors. And when the errors start to get pretty low, then you say, hey, I'm starting to believe in this model. This model's telling me this. I guessed this, but I'm over here now. I wanted to think this was right. I had a little bias when I came in. I got rid of my bias. I'm over here. And then you give it off to your client. They'll tell you, well, why don't you add that to it? and then it maybe shifts it a little over this way.
Mm-hmm.
Then you get an answer that nobody saw coming.
Right.
Except the market.
Right. Right.
However many people in that market, they knew what they wanted. There's not one collective voice to the market except when you do this math. But they can't say, Jared, I want that. Doug, I want this. They're not going to tell you that. You got to go dig that stuff out. And that's kind of what we like to do, is to dig that stuff out.
That's so great. It's so many parallels between what you're doing and some of the things I learned in market research and the consumer goods world. The consumer's not going to design it for you.
Right.
They can react to things and respond to things, but they can't tell you what feature to put or what color to make the thing.
Yes. Right.
Or how heavy is heavy enough, but not too heavy.
Right.
So the aspect that you're bringing to that equation in the work that you do is really critical. And I think it's at the heart of innovation, because that's where the new comes from.
Yeah. That's what we like to try to bring to our clients, is the ability to do something new.
Yeah. Yeah.
And with the mathematical certainties that come from having done enough analytics that you can place them into the right spot into the market.
Right.
You can still mess up. You can know everything there is to know. You can have a map to get from here to you. I can follow the map, but I can still make an error. But if I don't have a map and I take off towards the Pacific and you're in Atlanta, I'm going the wrong way.
Right.
And so you need to have some sort of general guidance. No, Doug, Jared's over to the east of you. You need to go that way. You need not to go this way. Go that way.
Exactly.
If you don't, you're just lost.
Yeah.
This is trying to give you directions so that you don't get lost.
That's brilliant. And then leads me right into my question around advice. Do you have any advice for innovators out there? People who want to be more innovative or want to do new things and help society take that next step?
Yeah, I'd say that you want to get a team that's got a broad spectrum of opinions. You don't want to come in with a bunch of people that think exactly the way you do. What you want to do is you want to get a team that's got the ability to form an opinion that's got a bunch of different elements to it. So, for example, if you don't have a team that can recognize, just a simple case that we had, we were preparing something for a client, and the first gal we had on our team made this part of the presentation in pink, which for most guys kind of thinks like, oh, you're kind of gone way too feminine. Well, it turns out that the fundamental logo color that this company had was pink. Nobody in our side, nobody else saw this. I'm going,
right.
Oh my God, this is spectacular. My bad, you're good. Thank you for that.
Yeah, yeah.
So you need to have people that can have a diversity of different viewpoints, because that's what markets are. It's not one person in a market telling you what's going on. It's everybody has got a different opinion. Now, at the tails, they'll be pretty different from each other, but in the collective, they form this relationship that you can quantify. And what you want to do is you want to get a bunch of people together that are from varying backgrounds and different points of view. And as a leader, you don't want to cut anybody off. You want to just say, hey, the reason I've got you here is I don't know everything. I need to know what you know, and we need to figure this stuff out collectively, because the chance of me getting everything right, close to zero. The chance of all of us getting everything closer to right is much higher. And that's what you want to try to go for, is to get a whole bunch of people getting some really good insights together and then boiling it all off to figure out what the right answer is.
Wow, that is great advice. Until you mentioned that, I hadn't really thought about it, but diversity makes sense on the team side.
Yeah.
If for no other reason than the fact that markets are diverse. They are an amalgam of a lot of different kinds of consumers.
Yeah. I mean, I see these cars going by, and every once in a while you'll see and this won't come out of the modeling on the first pass. You see there's a bunch of guys that like the really boxy cars, right?
Right.
It's got a boxy front end. It's got a boxy thing. They got a box on the end. It's usually underpowered and it's very unaerodynamic, but for a small segment of the market, it's perfect.
That's what they're looking for. Yeah.
So you have to have the way to get the diversity into that thing and figure out how big that market is. You got to be able to have the tools to do that.
Wow. Well said.
By the way, we haven't done that one yet. That's a tough problem, figuring that one out.
The auto industry?
Yeah. That part of the auto industry.
That part. Yeah.
That part.
Right. Yeah. That'll be an interesting exploration, especially given the new technologies that are coming to bear at the same time.
Yeah.
I can't imagine threading the needle in the auto industry right now from a consumer standpoint.
Whoa, yeah.
It's got to be tough.
Yeah. I mean, you've got hydrogen cars coming along.
Right.
You're going to have new electrics. You're going to have new electric chemistries going on. I mean, you're a chemical engineer. It's going to be a great time if you wanted to go back. It'd be a great time to be a chemical engineer.
Yeah, those days are far behind me. Yeah, nobody wants me anywhere near a chemical right now. But yeah, it's an amazing time to the alternative fuels and and all sorts of all the other elements that are going into how we transport ourselves from point A to point B in the next 20 years.
Yeah, it's phenomenal.
Doug, it's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thinking about innovation as society's next step. And I really look forward to staying in touch and hope all goes well for you.
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
All right. Take care. We'd love to hear your thoughts about this week's show. You can drop us a line on Twitter at Outlast LLC, OUTLAST LLC, or follow us on LinkedIn where we're Outlast Consulting. Until next time, keep innovating, whatever that means.